The people of the world speak many languages. They use many different sounds and written symbols to express the same ideas. For example, listen to some words in French.
Bonjour, mes amis. Je parle la langue française. Comprenez-vous?
Now in German.
Guten Tag, meine Freunde. Ich spreche Deutsch. Verstehen Sie mich?
Now in Latin.
Salvete, amici. Linguam Latinam locor. Me intellegitis?
Hello, friends. I am speaking the English language. Do you understand me?
Of course we understand our own language. But what of its relation to the other languages we heard? What of its relation to England and English history? Where did our language come from? What is the story of the English language? The introduction to our story begins before there was an English language. During the 1st century A.D., Roman troops invaded England and began their conquest of the island. They found primitive stone monuments which had been built by a very early people for use in religious rites. They found a land of rich farming country and forests, on which were then living tribes called the Celts. The Romans dominated England and ruled the Celts for roughly 400 years, and there remain today many traces of their power, such as a wall built on Roman foundations, and the ruins of a public bath. The land was left to the Celts in the year 411 A.D., when the last Roman armies were withdrawn from England. But new invasions were already brewing. Along the northern coasts of Europe lived various Nordic tribes: the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Frisians. These tribes began to migrate to England. Thousands came, landing on the beaches, settling on the rich farmland, pressing into the forests to hunt. Over a period of many years they came and pushed the Celts back into the forests and hills. These tribes intermingled and spread throughout England, except for parts of Wales and Scotland. The stage had been set for Chapter 1 of our story, the Anglo-Saxon or Old English period. The languages of the Nordic tribes were much alike, and as traveling storytellers moved about among the tribes, the various languages began to be intermixed. Here were the real beginnings of the English language. The storytellers, or epic singers, kept alive myths of the past, fables of valor and bravery, of battles and wars, stories common to all the tribes. Through the years, the various tongues became almost as one. At last, some of the epics were written down in a single language. The epic of Beowulf begins, What we gardenen jaradagum felt kuninga frimja frunen, uda athalingas allen frimedan. Yes, that is Anglo-Saxon or Old English. In modern print, the words look like this. Now we can make out a few familiar words: we, in, king. And here is a word-for-word translation into modern English. Lo, we Speardanes in your days, of the people king's glory heard, how the heroes' valor performed. Besides the great epics, we have an important historical document, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. This work was begun at the command of King Alfred the Great about 900 A.D. By this time, the various Nordic tribes were intermixed, and Angleland, or England, was becoming united into a single nation. And then an important historical date ushered in Chapter 2 of our story, Middle English, 1066. An 11th century tapestry shows how William the Conqueror led the Norman French in a conquest of England. These Normans were a civilized, skilled people, believed to have come from the north and settled in Normandy in France. In coming to England, they brought with them the French language of their day. The Anglo-Saxon farmer lived in a house, raised a pig, and wore a hat or hood, all Anglo-Saxon words. The Norman conqueror lived in a castle, ate pork, and wore a helmet. These French words and many others were added to the growing English language. Readers and singers were spreading the language for hundreds of years when few people could read and write. Around 1400 A.D., Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the great Canterbury Tales, set down old folk fables and tales in the new language. The prologue to the Canterbury Tales begins, "When that April with his surest sota, the drucht of March hath passed to the rota." Yes, this is Middle English. Set in modern type, you can recognize many of the words. And here is a translation into modern English. When sparkling April with his gentle rains. Here we can find Anglo-Saxon words. When, with, his, and French words, April, pierced, flower. And there are words from another language, too. Remember the 11th century tapestry? In what language is the text written? Not Anglo-Saxon, not French, but Latin. Let's pause for a footnote on the influence of Latin, stemming from the Roman conquest, the medieval church, and the Norman invasion. From the Roman conquest of England, few Latin words remain except for the names of locations. The medieval church sent Christian missionaries who traveled through England using Latin for worship and leaving a heritage of Latin words and learning. The Norman conquerors brought with them Latin law and a language that was only a short step removed from Latin. Thus far in our story, the English language has changed rapidly and repeatedly under many influences. Chapter 3, Modern English, is the story of relatively little change in the language between 1500 and today. William Shakespeare, in the 16th century, wrote lines which need no translation, although in his plays and poems he enriched the language with new words and ideas. Why is it that English has changed more slowly since then? First, because of the printing press. When books and newspapers could be produced in quantity, language became standardized. Second, the growth of London as the cultural and literary center for all England helped to set standards for the language. Third, as the great English universities grew in importance, the English language began to rank in stature with the classic languages of the world. But as the world has changed, the language has grown. Inquisitive men began to explore. New lands were discovered. The English language was planted in America, and in America, the English language grew in vocabulary. From the Indians came such words as wigwam, papoose, raccoon, added to our language as words in the past had been added. New conditions brought new ideas, and new ideas brought new words. New inventions have brought new words to describe them. Today, in print and by the spoken word, our American English language is spread throughout the world, a language that has grown and changed faster at first, more slowly yet steadily in modern times. Although we've come to the end for now, we know that the story of the English language is to be continued.